In this video, I'm going to talk about what New World needs to change to be successful in 2023 and beyond. Now, the first one we already know is actually sort of somewhat in progress, and that is we know there is going to be a change to the gearing system. If anything, Amazon actually called it a major gear overhaul. However, we obviously don't know exactly what that entails, but we do know that Ward and Bane is being removed and Resilience may be on the chopping block as well. We're not 100% sure. Now, with Ward and Bane being removed, which I think is overwhelmingly a good thing, I think New World are heading in the right direction. However, it really depends on what actually replaces it. For me, the Ward gear was effectively a progression system, albeit one that I think was very much not enjoyable. And really, I think gearing and progression is something where New World absolutely fails. We all know, and Amazon themselves obviously realised this, that they started off with a survival game and tried to turn it into an MMO. However, they didn't really complete that journey yet. I hope they don't think that they have. The gearing system needs a complete overhaul, and if they've not got any better ideas than basically replicating a standard MMO, then they should basically just replicate a standard MMO, be it World of Warcraft or what have you. Personally, I've never been a fan of the gear score. I've never been a fan of like the standardized perks, so where everything is the same amount of strength or the stat that you're interested in, and then it's just a combination of 1, 2 or 3 perks and a gem. I think that's very, very formulaic and I don't really like it. I'd personally like more customized items, but that's neither here nor there, because how you actually get gear is also part of the major problems. We all know that crafting is complete RNG. Every system in New World is pretty much RNG. Yes, you can get decent ward gear by doing mutations, but it's completely random. Yes, you can get decent PvP gear by doing PvP, but it's random with the reward track, it's random with outpost rush caches, it's completely random. Expertise is a system that probably needs to go away. Umbral shards is a system that I don't necessarily mind too much, but I know a lot of people at this point are just sort of fed up with that concept. There's a lot of little things when it comes to gearing that probably need to go away or be changed. For example, look gear, be it just your standard loot look or skinning look, mining look, that kind of thing. All of that stuff probably just needs to disappear. And really what it boils down to is that New World really needs to decide if we're going to be having vertical progression or horizontal progression. It feels like they haven't properly made up their mind. And I think that's all because of what they did about 3 months after launch. For those of you who don't know, when they introduced the mutations, they obviously increased the gear score cap from 600 to 625. It's worth noting, by the way, that they initially planned it so you could only increase legendary gear, which would have been absolutely diabolically terrible. But at that point, obviously, apart from the legendary thing, they sort of got the feedback that it was too early to increase the gear score. And I think at that point, they sort of really moved away from increasing gear score. I'm pretty convinced that they probably intended to increase the gear score in subsequent patches. Definitely Brimstone, I think, would have increased the gear score normally, and I actually think Tempest might have been a patch where they would have done that as well. But I think they took the wrong lesson from that. It wasn't that we were against vertical progression, it was simply the speed of that. To release their game and then instantly sort of nullify it 3 months later felt way too quick. But Amazon said, well, we just won't do that kind of progression. And I think that was sort of the wrong idea. It's really the speed to me that's important, not the style of progression. We're basically doing a bad horizontal progression right now, whereas I think if they would have done vertical and people would have actually known they were doing vertical, it would have been a bit better. They need to make up their mind. There's other things that I could talk about with the gearing system. For example, I personally think trophies are just something that shouldn't really be a thing. Passive buffs, basically, that aren't really that enjoyable to get. Effectively, you pay gold, you get your passive buff, or you farm it yourself, but who can be bothered? And yeah, I really don't like it. Another little issue is the fact that we simply have too much gear. There's too many items, you're salvaging all the time. It's just not a very fun, enjoyable experience to get better gear. It really needs a massive overhaul. One of my main bugbears with New World is the fact that they've put a 500 item cap on your storage, which they did because it was probably causing like computational issues and it was causing slowness on the server. But you know what they actually should have done? They should have taken more effort to reduce the number of items. There's too much bloat that we don't need, and that should have gone, not put a cap on it. And that's something that New World seems to do a little bit actually. We needed gear sets and people were saying that 9 is too few, but the solution to that isn't to give us more gear sets. What they should have done and what they are now doing is reduce the amount of gear sets that you actually need. All that Ward and Bane like sets, where there's like 6 or 7, I can't remember exactly how many you actually need right now, that should have gone away, but they kept it. I'm a little bit cynical there, and I think that they actually kept it so that people would buy the gear sets, but whatever, I'm okay with it. Okay, moving my little manifesto away from gearing for a minute, because I could probably go on and on there. there's another big thing that I think also needs to change, and that is the territory control system. I've said it before and I'll say it again, there is too big of an impact that the war people are having on everybody else, and there's too few of those people. So basically the reward is too great and the people involved is too small. They need to fix that one way or another. They tried to expand the amount of people who are getting in there, and that has failed because it's simply people going to create alts and they're just going to use those alts on different accounts. You can put a limit on the account, but you can't put a limit on the amount of accounts that they can have. So for me, I think we need to sacrifice the PvP players. It's a little bit harsh, but we need to just accept that the PvP war system has failed. New World itself technically has probably failed. The play numbers just aren't that high. And I think the war system being very elite is definitely one of its pain points, and I don't think it'll be a successful MMO personally until we get rid of it. However, I could be wrong. Now, the war players would be absolutely furious with that, and I completely get that. What I would actually suggest in the short term is to simply take away the gold and give them gear instead. There's no reason in my eyes that they would be very unhappy with that, unless maybe they're selling the gold to some dodgy places, in which case I understand being very unhappy with me. But if you take away the gold, give them gear, sort of keep them a little bit more niche, I think we're sort of better off with that kind of system. But personally, I just can't see a way around it being ever like a niche thing. There's always going to be a small percentage of people playing it. Even if there were 10 million people playing New World on loads of servers that were full, well, on each server, there's only ever going to be like a limited number of people who can participate. Whether or not that's everybody who wants to, I don't know. One way or another, I think that needs changing. It's not actually changing right now because we know we're getting the territory changes with the expansion, and we also know in Season 4 we're actually getting seasonal territory control changes, so it doesn't sound like they're planning a massive overhaul there. However, I think there should be. And I sort of mentioned RMT there, and going back to the gearing system, I think we sort of need to move away from the player-driven economy. So giving people gear for doing the content instead of giving them gold or something like that, I think would be better. Now, player-driven economies sound perfectly great in theory. However, what happens is people manipulate them and abuse them, and it doesn't really work out in a way that we'd like. I was streaming today and somebody said, well, people just won't buy gear under your new system. And I said, that's perfectly fine, because what I actually want to do is farm out the gear myself. That would be okay. I obviously think that gold should play some kind of impact. There should be a currency that you can exchange. It's just you're sort of leading yourself out with this possibility of having bots if you have gold and RMT being very, very strong. I think we need to move away from that. Another thing that I think probably needs changing is simply the accessibility of content. I alluded to it there with wars because wars are sort of gated, but in general we need to move away from content where the players are filtering out other players, as well as making it easier to get into content. Some of the best, easiest content to get into is actually Outpost Rush and Arena, because you can simply queue it, and you might get some people arguing with you, but you can solo queue it, you can do it, you can get out. And actually your gear is actually upscaled to 600, so it's not that bad. And what I really foresee happening here is simply with when it comes to mutations. Number one, we need to reduce the amount of mutations, but we know they're doing that. And then number two, you need to leave the system what we have right now, so speedrunners can find other speedrunners and the hardcore players can find each other and check the gear and stuff. But you also need to give us a button that says automatically queue me in. I should be able to go to Lazarus, click a button, click whichever M version I want to do, queue me in, I'm in with other people who are randomly queued in. Yes, we might fall out, but that's okay. Let me have that experience rather than like pre-selecting me beforehand. Now, removing Ward and Bane will definitely help with that because the gear requirement will possibly just be gear score, which is okay. I also think there's a question there about the raid difficulty as well. I know a lot of people don't really agree with me. It looked like about just under 1,000 people completed the raid in the first month. Presumably there's maybe like 100,000 people playing, so you literally have created some content for 1% of the audience. Now, for me, I don't necessarily think we should be designing games for the elite few. I think we should be designing games for everybody involved. Your casual player base make up the majority of the player base, really. Now, I've done the raid. I think I've done it like 5 times at this point. It's fine once you have a good group and all that kind of stuff, but getting to that point is quite difficult, and getting a raid leader who knows what they're doing, etc. It's all a little bit difficult, actually. I think ultimately my point there is that if you are designing for your niche players, then ultimately what is ending up happening is that only the niche players are playing. And then when you want to make changes, all of those niche players are like, hey, why would you do that? I'm the one actually playing your game. And it makes it very hard to convince you to change it because of that very reason. but New World's play numbers aren't exactly super high. I think now is the time to gamble. Now is the time to actually make drastic changes. And I say that with the raid, but I also say that with relation to the wars as well. I think content accessibility is a huge issue in New World, and one example that I think really shows that AGS were messing up is simply the expedition orbs. Number one, they shouldn't have been in the game at the start, and then number two, they should have changed a lot quicker. So it used to be that you had to pay to get into an expedition basically. You actually needed items, but then people paid for those items, so it is what it is. And a lot of people didn't do the expeditions because of paying to get in them. Okay, so they got rid of it. They got rid of it, by the way, about a year after the game came out, just under a year actually. And the solution was to simply put a cap on how many you could do in a day or a week or what have you. And one of the reasons they did that was because of the gold involved, because you get some gold from killing the mobs, but you also got gold from just doing it. I think it was like 500 for each run, and you could do it twice. But you know what's interesting? They actually eventually have removed that gold and put it in the corruption breaches. But the cap still stays, and it still took them a year to actually remove it. And when it comes to gold, and I think I was talking about the player-driven economy, I would like to see gold go into the hands of people who are consistently playing the game and doing most of the normal content. It is possible if you are a hardcore PvPer that you could simply warlog and still have a lot of gold. I sort of want to change that. I think if you're actually doing content, if you're doing expeditions, if you're doing Outpost Rush, if you're doing arenas, give those people gold. They are your normal players. They are the people who should be having gold. Removing it from expeditions is completely the insane way to do it, in my opinion. They should have taken that gold away from the war players. I think you should be able to farm mobs in the open world and make gold. Now, the last one is just something I've been thinking about lately. I've said many times that the reason I play New World is the combat, but the more and more I've thought about this lately, and the more I've looked at other games, maybe like PAX Day and Soulframe, the more I see maybe the combat is too fast in New World. And I'm not just necessarily talking about the time to kill. A lot of people reminisce when we used to have Stagger. Now, Stagger causes a lot of problems because it causes a lot of frustration. Every hit you getting stunned and stuff like that. It was a little bit frustrating. But I tell you what it did change. It moved the kind of skill in New World from being like Twitch reaction based to being more strategy and tactical based. And I think we sort of need to go back to that a little bit. Now, there's a few problems with that. If you're going to have slow combat with 50 versus 50 in wars, it's going to get a little bit chaotic. I don't know how they would solve that necessarily, because Outpost Rush itself would also be affected. But I do think that the combat is a little bit of an issue. Now, it's great. New World is great in one way, in the fact that the skill expression is very high. Like an elite quality PvPer would probably beat me 100 times out of 100, and I'm an average player, say. That's good. However, it's basically a set of skills that are all like Twitch-based, reaction-based, knowledge-based to like what abilities to do and stuff like that. If you ever like watch the PvP in New World, it's people dodging all over the place, rolling about, doing their abilities, dodging away, running off. It's all a little bit like chaotic. And I think that sort of takes away some of the action nature of the combat. Action, we sort of wanted Dark Souls in its sort of like speed, where you have to sort of think about what you're doing. Instead, we sort of have like reaction. People are just like pressing all the buttons who are pressing them in the right order. If I press them in the wrong order, I'm going to die. I just think it's a little bit bad. And the reason I think it's bad is not because I'm bad at it, even though I am bad at it. I'm actually okay if that's what they want to do. The reason I think it's bad is because I think it makes the game hard to play for your average player. A lot of us are boomers these days. And whilst there are people my age very, very capable of doing fast Twitch-based stuff, a lot of us aren't. And I think, again, this is a case where the design of New World has lent into these like 5% PvPers who are very, very good, but I think ultimately hurting the game in a way because we're designing for them. I would like to see the combat slow down. I still think the best PvPer should beat me almost 100% of the time. I'm completely on board with that. I just think the type of gameplay should probably change a little bit. Now, I'm not really sure what I'm saying here. This one I've not really spent too much thought on, but the more I think about it, the more I can't recommend this game to my wife. Like, my wife isn't necessarily amazing at computer games. I can't really recommend it to her. If she went in PvP, she'd get absolutely smashed every day. However, World of Warcraft, yeah, I can possibly recommend that to her. My wife's not stupid. She's just not got these like fast, like reaction-based hand-eye coordination stuff. And I think that's actually part of a problem. And I think New World could sort that, but I'm not sure there's appetite to solve that. Sure, they could actually slow down the time to kill, but I think that would actually make it worse a little bit because people would just run off a little bit easier. I'm not sure what the solution is there. I don't think Stagger's necessarily the solution, but right now it's a little bit chaotic. It always has been, to be fair, and I do personally like it, but I do think it might also be causing a few problems. I'm not saying that people who are better than me shouldn't beat me every time. Let me get that clear. I just think that the skill is perhaps too much in one category rather than the other. Like tab target games are maybe more strategy and tactics and stuff like that and knowledge, whereas New World is more Twitch-based Zoomer kind of action. You can have a middle ground somewhere, and that's all I'm advocating for. Those really are the main things that I think need changing in New World, or they need sort of addressing. I think without that, we might always be playing a niche game, and there'll be many people out there, probably myself included, who will actually enjoy it. But if they change these, I think we can enjoy it as well, and then I think more people can enjoy it with us. Let's hope they do some of them at least. I know some of this is probably controversial, I'm going to get a lot of hate in this one, but those are my opinions, you're just going to have to live with it. What you should definitely do though is have a most beautiful day, like and subscribe. Goodbye.